think I'll stop now, and I'll just let you explain the system as is.
Right. So, both of us have been working with Dalit literature for some time. In 2022, one of our very close mentors, so to speak, who had been a Dalit activist and an editor, passed away. And he had been collecting Dalit magazines, periodicals for a long time. And we got to know that there is not going to be taken care of all that documents. People were not very sure what is going to happen. And then that uncertainty led us to conversation, to dialogues, and so we thought that there should be a project to take care of them, to digitize them. That was the beginning, and then we realized that we started working that these periodicals, particularly Dalit periodicals, are very ephemeral in nature because there is no preservation facilities that is extended to them. Subscribers are not exactly the one that fit the definitions. They are distributed. So in that way, sustaining a periodical for a longer period of time is a struggle on its own. They change their frequency, which starts as weekly, become monthly, then quarterly, and so on. So we started talking to the editors. Rahul joined me in that project. So we both started talking to the editors and collectors of this magazine, particularly from 1960s to 90s. These are the 30 years we started looking at. Again, then we started thinking about who could help us, fund such a project that we can look into these 30 years of Dalit periodicals and what kind of exchanges of ideas that has happened. So eventually we placed a project proposal to our university where we work, and we started with this pilot project for a year. The idea was to trace these magazines, the exchange of ideas between two, so to speak, languages, Bangla and Marathi, where there had been very strong little magazine movement as well as Dalit movement. And as we started working, we started finding the uniqueness about both these places, both these languages, their Dalit politics, and of course the periodical culture, particularly with the Dalit periodicals. So we figured that it has a very long history. Bengal, if we speak, from the first decade of the 20th century, the Dalit community started publishing Dalit periodicals, but it's very difficult. We couldn't actually trace much, though we could see photocopies of some of them scattered over in Bangladesh somewhere, some of the archives from 1907. That was the first periodical that was published, Namashudra Hitoishi. We did get a copy, only one copy of one 1918 edition, though it's partially damaged. So there was this periodical culture, and there was a lot of discussion about having this instrument for your community to talk about the Dalit positions in different political matters to shape the public opinion. And then came Ambedkar in 1930s, who talked about, who was editor for so many periodicals himself. And then it became a huge thing, particularly in Dalit literature also from 1950s, where different Dalit literature terminology started coming in. Dalit literature itself, and then periodical became not only to shape a platform to shape the public opinion, but also a place where Dalit literature can find a platform to challenge the mainstream literature. So it was a very important platform where almost all Dalit writers were published. Arjun Dangle, Baburao Bagur, every Dalit writers that we read today, they all started writing in these periodicals. But when we started also looking at where are those editions, we would find mention of them in the introduction to some of the anthologies that were published in 90s, in early 2000. But we couldn't see much academic work, or actually no such academic work on this periodical culture, the Dalit periodical culture as such. In what conditions they were produced, they were circulated, how were they received. There is no systematic scholarship on it, so to speak. So that's where our project came into being. So one of the objective was to recover this vanishing documents, to digitize them, to look into its relationship with the Little Magazine movement, which were also very strong. So how did it work? There were people who were working, were part of the Little Magazine movement, and also part of the Dalit periodicals. So what kind of exchange of ideas were happening between different Indian languages, as well as with the conversation between, the transnational conversation through the Little Magazine movement. And there were a lot of things happening in terms of print innovation, in terms of circulation, production. However, we realized that it's a very time-sensitive work. Both the places that we were looking at, Bengal and Maharashtra, its weather conditions aren't very challenging. It's very hot and humid, prone to floods, long spells of rain every year. And if you do not have proper preservation, it's difficult to store. And these materials are also made of, cheap materials, the paper quality, the glue, the binding itself. All of these are actually making these documents prone to damage. So some of the documents that we started recovering, they were not only insects, but fire damage, water damage is very common to all these documents. So it was a very quite challenging for us to figure out in a shoestring budget how to take care of it and digitize it and not incurring any further damage to these documents. So, and then also to gauge what should be an ideal representative number, as well as a practical size that we can actually recover. So we figured out that will be somewhere around 60,000 pages. And we managed to did in last 2 years, with the support of our university, around 16,000 pages only, involving 16 different titles, periodicals, so to speak. A lot remains to be done. I think we are looking forward to something around 80,000 to 100,000 pages of digitization that should be taken care of. Also, we think that there is a huge scope of translation. We have been in discussion with scholars of translation. We both ourselves also translate. So we established a committee to oversee, to look into it. So we have initiated the process, and we are looking into it. However, we have been very thankful to the expertise in British Library and different other places which actually has opened centers, like in Jadavpur University in Bengal, where such digitization works are going on endangered archives. And we got some training from them which helped us. And in last 2 years doing this digitization project, we realized that we need a lot more there is to learn for us, the whole digitization process. And the translation itself, it's such a huge thing. In our conversation with Judith and Nicole, we have been thinking that, we should try machine translations, because when we're talking about this amount of pages, it's only feasible probably when we think about machine translations. About that, there are challenges, as of course, because Bangla and Marathi, these are the languages we are primarily talking about. So we need a software which is not only going beyond English, going to Bangla and Marathi, but also there are different dialectical variations, because when we talk about Dalit periodicals, we are also talking about historical events like partition of India. A lot of people coming from East Pakistan, Bangladesh to Bengal. Majorly a huge population is Dalit population. We are talking since late 80s citizenship debates. And so therefore, it's kind of not only a palimpsest of this historical trajectory that this landmass had been, but also different dialects in which this is written, the vocabulary. So it will be a huge challenge to work with and to keep working with throughout the period of the project and develop that software that will be translating it. We have to keep feeding it with our knowledge of language, and so that's a very challenging thing, but I think it's doable, and we need that kind of expertise and vision, and so I think I'll stop here and ask Rahul to add anything to
I
add.
think most of it you have already talked about, but two things I will briefly talk about. One is the underrepresentedness of the Dalit periodicals. And the content of the material. The content is very rich in itself. It talks about the history, it talks about various aspects of the politics that was going through 1960s, 1990s and onwards. So, apart from all these technical things that we have already discussed, I think these periodicals are very important because of its content, and underrepresentedness mainly because there was a divide between the mainstream and the lower caste representation, periodical press and all of those. So it was very challenging to really talk about the periodicals and the periodical press. So all that discussion actually comes along in these periodicals, in the discussions that they take out. So I think that is also going to be very, very important for our project, that somehow to bring this into light, the underrepresented aspect of the material that we will be archiving. Apart from that, I think we have been talking about this idea of the nodal centers, but that would be, I think, primarily we are thinking of Marathi and Bangla, but going ahead we are also thinking of including few more languages, Tamil, Punjabi, Hindi. So it would be better to have the nodal centers which can actually take care of managing things, if we can get people there, and if that can be worked out through this idea of the nodal center. So that is another thing that we have been thinking aloud. I hope it, somewhere it shoots off.
If I may just add to that, what Rahul was saying, the significance of the content. As we started developing, we started developing a website to house these digitized periodicals, and we are planning the official launch in August, middle of August, 16th of August. So there are a lot of people who are already informed about this. So we started getting queries from not only literature department, but from political science, anthropology, many departments, history. So they are all their queries show like how different interdisciplinary research pursuits can be housed around these periodicals. On the other hand, the other point that Rahul also mentioned, that when we had a gathering, we did a workshop and a conference where a lot of people came from different languages, and we got to know that of course it is not only in Bangla and Marathi that Dalit periodical culture was so vibrant, whereas in Bangla it started, so to speak, in the first decade of 20th century, in Marathi around the same time, in the 1920s, 1520s. In other languages, in Gujarati, in Tamil, it was also there. So almost around the end of the 19th century and so on. And the problem that we see right now is there is a lack of also awareness within India that these periodicals are there, and they can be in some way accessed, but they need to be preserved. They are dying, they are vanishing. So there is a viable research possibilities, not only speaking from the point of view of print culture, the marginal literature, but in different ways. When you talk about folk culture and folk literature, when you talk about transnational ideas, as we talked about the interaction between Little Magazine movement and Dalit movement, literature and the literary movements. So we got to know there were a lot of people who came to us that if you are thinking to sharing your digitization facility, extending it to other languages. So from there we started making new acquaintances from Tamil, from Gujarati, who actually reached out to us and said that if they want to digitize some of their materials. So that's how we came to this idea of a nodal center where we can share this expertise with them.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about what those nodal centers would look like?
Ideally, we should have a center which do the capacity building workshops, which will train people to handle digitization instruments. It will be giving them some workshop and training. We would be also open to such centers should be also open to house such documents temporarily, and if need be the facilities for digitization. Down the road, I think they should also try to encourage building of regional centers. So for example, we have to think in terms of the geography of India as well as the language. So if we see North and South India, we can think about a central location like Hyderabad, which can be the location for a nodal center, which can be easily accessible for North and South India both, different parts, even East and West India. That's Hyderabad central location. So where people can come, stay, get trained how to use these instruments for digitization. Capacity building workshops can be held, and temporarily we can also, let's say somebody from Gujarat comes, sends us bulk of material, we help them in digitization, and eventually what we think they can have a center in Gujarat itself where they can, after the digitization is done, they can house those materials and a few systems, and people can have access to both the physical copies as well as the database from the center in Gujarat. So this has its own, why do I say these centers? This needs a lot of maintenance, a long-term investment, but also the regional centers I think will be very necessary down the line because of the awareness it will create among the first language speaker of that periodical culture, so to speak. The nodal centers will be where a national level or international level dialogues are happening, but these regional levels is where the people will have easy access to it, both the physical copies as well as systems to access the digital copies, but have this conversation among themselves around the periodicals, so to speak.
And this will also help in some way preserving the material.
I mean, that seems to me the core importance of this is that you are recovering and preserving a largely hidden history and an activist culture which has been historically undervalued. And this kind of hub and spokes model as I see it. You know, your nodal centre is the hub. You have the spokes that go off into other regions. Although maybe maybe that doesn't complicate it enough, because you have a second node, don't you, which is where the material culture will be housed towards the end of the project. So yes, a hub and spoke is not enough, is it really, in order to put this in motion?
And of course it's all about preserving, obviously, but as any archive, it also looks towards the future.
Yes.
And so it's this base, building that will be, that is so important, in fact, in the present, especially in the days we're going through. And speaking of the activist, culture as well, so it would be quite, crucial.
We're also considering a creative element, because we've been working with the theatre collective Dangama, who have focused on one particular periodical, Panchama, in Canada. And they created, for Fest in Hyderabad, they created a play around material from Panchama, where they had songs and so on. They also invited audience contributions, I don't know who sang Bangla protest song and so on, and it was really lovely. So it was already a very community feel, so we're also trying to really make communities aware that this is, their own ownership of this material. So hopefully that will also guarantee the longevity of these nodal centres, right? Because at the moment we can maybe start, creating them, but at some point the communities will have to also sustain them and take responsibility for them.
So you mentioned at the beginning that it's difficult to find a lot of material that you want to digitise. Can you say a bit more about that? What are you doing to identify and then source this material? And where are you finding it? Who's leading you to it?
So we have, it depends on, it varies actually on field to field. For Bangla, for example, so my PhD research has been on 19th century periodical and printing culture. So from then onwards I started developing an interest. So I knew a lot of people who have their personal archives. But with particular Dalit archives, so to speak, we had to also talk and interview a lot of activists and editors. But a lot of times, so what we figured that is the editors also keep changing. So one person who has edited magazine A for 3 years may have 2 years collection. So where are the others? So that makes it very difficult at times. So it's in the absence of a centralized or any support for preservation, it's scattered. So it becomes challenging because you have to travel. You have to do extensive field work. You have to know the people. And the other challenge is these started in a big way in this post-colonial time, in 1960s, so to speak. The people we were talking about who are preserving and who have been preserving this, they are now 80 years old, 90 years old. And they have dedicated their lives for this cause. The reason I mention this that a lot of them have a lot of discontents in their family. You will not always find the second or the third generation very sympathetic to these documents. So what happens to these documents when these people are no more? They're dumped in some way. So it becomes, so you get to know that you'll probably get a document and you're a month late and those documents are gone. So there is always this fear and uncertainty about whether you will get the document or not. It's very time sensitive as well. So if you do this project 10 years down the line, as I said, instead of 100,000 pages, you will probably recover only 50,000 pages. The rest of it will be gone forever.
I think what's interesting about that, and also in terms of Judith's point about this is an archive for the future, it's not only about the past, is that where there are gaps in the archive, where you cannot bridge them, you can use creative ways to bridge those gaps, as Nicole said. But also if you're interviewing the activists and the editors, you are, you know, we do that oral history interviewing as a way of filling those gaps. You know, maybe being able to talk about editing in a particular moment means that for some of us it will be less important that you manage to recover every single material item. You know, because it does strike me that this is such a big and important project that there may be some things you cannot do immediately and that, you know, need to be put to the future. And one of the things that occurred to me, Rahul, you were talking about the content and, you know, the importance of that, and about reception. And I've always found that reception is the hardest element of research to do. So you said that some of this periodical culture is mentioned in the introductions to anthologies. But is reception something, could that be done at this stage of the project, or would it need to be done later? I mean, how would you know about the reception unless it's through all the history interviews?
Would you like to say something then? Otherwise,
So what we have done so far, I would share that. So as we started reading these periodicals, we also started interviewing a lot of editors, and we got to see some of the old documents where there are subscribers list. So we started putting one particular magazine and its readers on a map. We started locating their subscribers, and once that is done, we started also looking at, you know, who are the contributors over a 2 years period. We started putting all the writers also on a map, and a map emerged of a magazine with the editors, the writers, and the subscribers. And we started seeing how the map changed. So we did it for only 2 magazines, also for a period of 10 years only. And it shows that there is some possibility that we can, you know, try it for more magazines, and it can give us certain ideas, but also a very limited idea about this circle of, I think the argument that I would like to place at this point of time, that it created a generation of Dalit readers who believed in writing as activism. And a lot of these subscribers eventually started becoming readers. These maps we see started overlapping. So this is something that is becoming more and more clear to us. But we haven't actually also explored other ways to look about reception. Particularly, we are also interested about how the mainstream, the upper caste, looked at this periodical culture. That aspect we also haven't looked into much so far.
reception, I think, if you look at the material would itself give you some kind of a idea about how the periodicals were received largely, because you will get to see there were requests from the editors of the magazines to subscribe to this periodical. But also, if you look at the commercial aspect of it, it was not also emphasized a lot in the process. So, that is one point where you can try and trace what was being talked about as far as how the magazines were received. Generally, within the society, and also from within the community for whom it was actually meant. So that's one point. This is also specifically about the magazines that were running within the period from 1960s to 1990s. If we go a little further after 1990s and all, I think that will be easy to really think about the question of reception by talking to the editors, because they have the presses also now. they own the presses, so it would be like that. And I think I would like to respond to what you were saying. How did we get in touch with? So I have been working on Dalit literature for quite some time, and for my PhD I worked on religious conversion of the new Buddhists in Maharashtra, and while working on in the field of Dalit literature, I have been talking to people. I have certain contacts established already, so that is how I actually began when we thought of this project. So since I knew some people, since I had established certain contacts, I sort of dragged it further and then talked to people and then got the information, and then we reached out to the editors and all of that.
The challenges in Maharashtra, if I may add here, Rahul,
Sure.
it's like West Bengal is a smaller, in terms of size, it is smaller states, and we talk about three communities who are the largest scheduled caste Dalit communities, so to speak. In Maharashtra, it's two communities, so to speak, which are the largest scheduled caste. But Maharashtra is a huge state. So when I was accompanying him for field work in Maharashtra, so it was a huge challenge to cover thoroughly all the points, nodal centers, so to speak, of publication of Dalit periodicals, which are quite far from each other, quite remote, whereas in West Bengal, they are quite closer to the capital city of Calcutta. The size is such. So geographically speaking, Maharashtra presents an additional challenge besides what you mentioned also. And it's
This is a
very
challenge,
yeah.
but there is a lot of material again, because from every district you will find there are like good amount of
Productions.
productions happening.
I think that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Informal networks are central to the project, aren't they? We're getting, an understanding of who around the kind of fringes of those you can see already might also be able to identify material, even bring material to you that you can then scan and digitise.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And I was going to add something about reception because the beauty of the project is also that it's going to create potentially a new audience and a new readership in the 21st century of those magazines that have stopped being published, and so there is this renewal element of the readership, and people who may potentially start working on all that material that you were mentioning, because it's full of poems. It's also, we were talking about it this morning, so it's also full of letters and diaries. So it's not only the politics and the activist component, but it's also plays and poems, and so this is also going to generate potentially research and new readership.
Yes.
So I think this is also what is so interesting in the project.
Absolutely, and those readers' letters
And
are part of the
graphic,
reception.
also graphic and the visual,
Yes.
the art that came into it. So it's really transversal, and it touches upon so many different elements, from academia to communities to languages, and so that question of the readership and audience is also why it needs to have this international component and this international version. So
Now I've listened to you, I walked into here with Panya Banjoka, who did her PhD here, and she is the founder of Nottingham Black Archive. And so many I wish I'd said to her, Panya, are you free? Because so many of the things that you're talking about chime with how she has put together her archive, which is not based on periodical culture. It's more activist newsletters and magazines, but sort of pamphlet style. But it's interesting because one of the things that she's been very successful at doing is community scanning sessions. You know, where people bring in, communities are asked, you know, join us, you know, have a wonderful day together, you know, a social event, bring your materials, and, you know, we will scan them. You know, if you wish to donate them, please do, and you have a material copy. You know, if you prefer not to, because this, you see this as your family heirloom, please don't, but we have a digital copy. You know, and they've been incredibly successful in terms of the community joining in. So Panya may be a very good person to speak to at some point, because although the contexts are different, very different, the idea of recovery of a largely hidden and overlooked history is very much the same. Yeah.
It's a wonderful idea.
She's very good and very open. You know, and I'm sure you could join some projects together. You know, similar methodologies perhaps. Can I ask you a question about the little magazine culture, because you mentioned it a couple of times, and I'm trying to understand how that fits. So you've got the Dalit periodicals, which are a countercultural challenge to a larger periodical culture in and across India. I didn't quite understand how you're defining or where you're defining little magazines in terms of that conversation.
So basically, if you look at the Marathi Dalit periodicals, you will see that interestingly, the Dalit writings and little magazines movement coincide. It was 1960s when both came to light, and you will see Dalit writers writing in little magazines, and in fact there was someone called Raja Dalit who was a Dalit and who was one of the most significant person who was a part of the little magazine movement.
Okay. So there's crossover.
And he produced the little magazines on his own, along with other group of people. So him being a Dalit and then being a part of the little magazine movement was something very interesting.
You're able to see what? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. And then you will see that little magazines have given sort of a platform access to the Dalit writers to write, to produce poems and all of that. So it's very important that way. That there was some kind of an exchange, so to say.
So yeah, I mean, some kind. Interesting. Are you able yet to see in more detail what that exchange meant, apart from there being a series of connections and people writing in little magazine? I mean, are there formal, are there print, are there kind of structure of Dalit periodicals? Are they changing in response to this dialogue, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, very much, because it was as I said, that there is a dialogue, and dialogue is not only at the level of I think we will have to really go in depth talking about this, mainly because I think from language to language these dialogues may differ, and these dialogues will be also very specific to the geographical region itself. So you will see the dialogue between someone else from the little magazine movement, let us say Ashok Shahane, who is an upper caste, and then he is writing about some of his thoughts on the caste question, right? That kind of a dialogue. So that dialogue will happen between Dale and Shahane, and there will be that kind of an exchange. So there's this leftist kind of an idea that sips into thinking about the caste question. So how do the left understand the caste question, and how do the Dalit activists understand the caste question? So So such interesting dialogues you would see. And then, for example, during the 1960s, there was this Samyukta Maharashtra movement, which is like Gujarat was also a part of Maharashtra, Bombay, and then Mumbai has to be retained in Maharashtra. So the little magazines took up the initiative to have some kind of a dialogue on this, and then you will get to see different kinds of views being talked about and discussed in the magazines by the Dalit activists and by the upper caste sort of, the left Marxist kind of people. So that is also, this is very region specific, so to say.
So that's,
Yeah.
if I may just add to that, I think the crossover was there for Bengal as well, but the note on which Rahul just said, I think there was also a dialogue. See, both this little magazine and the literature had this avant-garde sense,
Yeah.
and then they fitted well together. But the dialogues led to this idea of Ambedkarite politics and left politics eventually. For Bengal, we see there is a lot of thing happening with poets coming from US. We talk about hungry generation poetry in Bengal. So there's a lot of poetry coming out of and questioning the caste in the writings of the hungry generation poets, so to speak. But then this conversation happens, as in Maharashtra and in Bengal also, like annihilation of caste is possible through following the left politics, or that it should have a distinct politics there. Should we therefore, whereas in language of literature, we are getting a new diction, we are getting a new style, we are getting to challenge the mainstream language, the so-called dictum, the conventions. However, at the same time, should we, in the long term, given the challenges that periodicals have, stick to the idea that there should be no advertisement? So there is a conversation also creeping up gradually. A lot of the periodicals and people are coming out of the little magazine movement because they want to have advertisement. So there are different paths taken in different places, of course. I think to borrow from Judith what she was mentioning, the visual aspects of these periodicals, we also get to see a lot
that
of
is another important visually appealing.
That's going to be really important. I mean,
Yeah.
the map already that you were describing, that just made me think of interdisciplinary researchers being able to use that map. It would be wonderful, to have that. And then, as you say, the visual culture of the actual artifacts, but also the epiphemera, because you could be, you could want to look at the things that surround the articles, couldn't you? You could look at the production values. The letterheads, all those other things about the history of the artifact and how they change. So there's so many different potential ways into this project, I think.
All starts with the recovery though,
It
right?
does.
And the preservation and the making it available, but also the translation. Yeah, that's a huge challenge because, as they both said, there's so much variation within just those two languages, and we're also looking at more languages to potentially include as the project grows.
Yeah, so in terms of that, the technical dimensions of digitisation, I'm a bit unclear about exactly what you're doing. You use scanning images. Is there a text scanning component that makes the archive searchable, the online archive searchable? Is that a part of the project as well to do that?
Yeah, so we had a discussion on whether to have British Library Endangered Archives. So they have this process of having TIFF images.
Yeah.
which is good, but we also see it's not a very user-friendly thing to read through. So why not PDF? Now, there were also a lot of apprehension. These are not being so endangered archive projects that British Library does. They have this. All of these are like 19th century at least, and we are talking about here the second half of 20th century. So there are copyright issues involved, and even if we have all the permission taken care of, in case people reproduce it in some way, so that scare is also there. We were afraid that people take screenshots, download, misuse it, reproduce it. So should we go ahead with PDF or not? So we consulted with the editors. We looked into the different archival digitization projects also. So we thought one of the purpose is for future generations and researchers and readers, for them it to be easily accessible, and it is to be preserved. And that is why we went ahead with the PDF versions, where one issue is there. You open it, you can read it easily. It is not like a docx Word doc, so you cannot search within, because this is in Bangla and Marathi. So that is another thing that we should explore. We are talking about it for some time. There is a possibility of developing through the machine translation. The whole digitization process and translation will be interlinked, but in a way so that it can be digitized in a way that it becomes a searchable within a docx, a Word doc, and that will also help with the translation. And when we talk about 100,000 pages, I think we should think about that system of digitization.
That approach also, should guarantee the sustainability of the material you produce as well, because platform software obsolescence is a major problem with digitization.
Yeah.
So absolutely. That sounds fantastic.
Which is why issue by issue is usually the best way, isn't it? To keep an issue whole. You have more chance of it being preserved beyond any kind of digital changes than the more complicated versions, I think.
Andrew has been very helpful because he works with magazines a lot. You've been too in your research, of course. But it's a different world. The periodicals kind of studies world, and we also want to integrate the Dalit magazine studies more into this global field.
I was thinking about that because as you move into the 1960s, of course there are some crossovers between Dalit activists and the US civil rights movement, and which are interesting to me, and more transnational conversations. They're ever increasing, aren't they? So I do think that while you're saying maybe copyright issues will begin to rear their head at that stage, there are other things that will be incredibly interesting for people to follow up, because that's partially where I've come across Dalit writing before, when it's been recognised in the periodical culture of the radical culture of the US civil rights movement. I mean, I published in a series on radical print culture, and I'm working with some colleagues elsewhere on a collection at the moment, and I think Nicole's right. There are lots of ways of defining radical print culture, and this is one of them. So that is a way in which this wonderful project would have some international global resonance as well, because there are so many crossovers that you could see in the future once you've got this. You've done a lot of work, but once you've got this
conversation like that
funded.
It's a brilliant project, isn't it? And it's not hard to make a case for it. Right? Everyone who is talking about this project, everyone sees its value, its significance, and the importance, and also the extreme urgency.
And the transnational expertise, of the four of you around the table. you know, that in itself is, you know, a wonderful relationship that, you know, proves the value of this project outside of the immediacy of Dalit cultures now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you. It's nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're really
So
fascinating.
much,
Thank you.
So much expertise. It was just lovely to hear about it. And I've got no sense of it. My goodness, it's past 2
It's the
o'clock.
2 hours. It flew by.
It
didn't
flew by. I have no idea how long you were talking.
With that 10-minute introduction.
Yes, Nicole's 10 minutes.
10 minutes, so you've got an hour.
And we started
Excellent
late because I was
material.
late, so sorry again about that.
I will like to show you with something quickly. So this is the website we are developing. So these are
This
some
is
of the
also how you see the
periodicals.
graphic and the visual things.
Oh, it is really
So this is what our first project was called.
up in the yeah.